All right. We got a couple more people jumping on Zoom. All right. Well, good morning. Happy Friday. Happy May 1st. We made it. Already 5 months in of 2026. Again, my name is Simon Cazares. I am the team lead and the managing broker for multiple offices. We're going to be dealing with multiple counter offers today. Surprisingly, people don't understand the differences of the seller counteroffer and the seller multiple counteroffers. All right. So we're going to be diving into the do's and don'ts for seller and their agents, because I think it's important and vital to understand how these documents work, right? Just because a seller sends you a multiple counteroffer doesn't necessarily mean that if the buyer signs and approves the seller multiple counteroffer, that doesn't mean it's an acceptance. Okay. So we'll dive deep into that conversation. And obviously, the compliance elements of it as well, right? Meaning that if you don't have multiple buyers, you should not be using the seller multiple counteroffers, because if they, and when I say they find out, the buyer's agent, that can be a conflict and that can be an ethics issue, because you're just trying to persuade the buyer to think that there's other offers on the table. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. So, and again, if you have any questions, please let me know. I'll be more than happy to answer. And if you want the copy of the presentation, let me know. Send me an email, and I'll be more than happy to send you a PDF on this presentation as well. All right, so let's move on. So, what are we going to cover today? Okay, we're going to cover why multiple offers create a legal complexity. Okay. The use of the seller multiple counteroffer form correctly and not to misuse the SMCO. And then strategies and how to counter and utilize, because there's language that is being used and it puts confusion and uncertainty. And you'll see it when you see it. I'm not going to give it up just yet, but in essence, it's something that you need to understand. And it'll maybe give you kind of an aha moment too, as well, in my opinion. I don't know. But today's lecture is really just to understand how to maneuver this. Okay. You're the listing agent. You are now getting offers on the listing that you have and then how to utilize the form. I'm not going to dive into the buyer counter offer, but it's the seller side and the seller's multiple counter offer. Oh, gosh. No, you did not. I can't believe this happened. Never fails. All right, let's see if I can revive this. Yes, here we go. All right. People on Zoom, can you see the presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I'm over here trying to be techie about this little laser thing, but it's not necessarily working. So multiple offers, a double-edged sword. Okay, double-edged sword. Receiving a competing offer is super exciting, right? I mean, you're the listing agent, you receive offers already exciting in itself, right? More so if it's offers at or above asking price, right? And more so, it's even more exciting when you receive not just one, but two or three or four offers on your listing because now you have room to negotiate, right? The more offers, the more exciting now that you can now cherry pick which are clients, what best price terms and conditions, right? So the essence is today's conversation is really stems from receiving multiple offers. Okay. The two distinguish forms, right? The two forms you need to know SCO and the SMCO. seller counteroffer, and the seller multiple counteroffer. Okay, so the distinguishes between the two is very simple. Okay, if you have one offer, are you going to send a multiple counteroffer? No. Okay, you're going to send a singular offer, right? Because you don't have another offer. So use for one buyer at a time, binding the moment that the buyer signs and delivers, right? If you don't have any other offers, then the only counteroffer would be the singular. Now, what happens if you're negotiating terms back and forth, right, with one buyer, and then all of a sudden a new offer comes in? Okay, new offer comes in. What is our position as a listing agent when it comes to, oh no, we have another offer in place? How do we handle and navigate that, right? Well, the simplicity of the situation is one, it's exciting because now you can pivot from a single to now a multiple counteroffer, right? But you also got to be calculated in how you approach this, right? Because if the seller accepts the terms or the buyer accepts the terms of the seller counteroffer, then you have a binding agreement. And therefore, you cannot negotiate terms for acceptance, but now only as a backup offer only, with the hopes that, the second offer is not as good. But if it's good and you've already accepted or your client accepted the seller counteroffer, you're kind of stuck. And now you have to go through the motions of opening escrow with the buyer that you've been negotiating, right? And then the second buyer you would have to put as a backup offer number one in case buyer number one doesn't perform, doesn't close, and ultimately we cancel. Then you can pivot into the second. But let's say that you're just back and forth like tennis, boom, 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 and the offer hasn't been accepted, right? So another offer comes in. Now you're in a position of having two offers, right? So the immediate thing that you must understand and how to pivot is you have to let the first buyer and send what's called a withdrawal of offer. Okay, the WO offer. Okay, it's really rescinding whatever we agreed to. That's off the table now. Well, Simon, wait a minute. Listen, um, we submitted an offer. The seller responded that they'll do these terms, right? And in essence, right, another offer comes in that basically wipes out any terms that we've been negotiating. One, it's still not set in stone, right? But the essence is when we send a withdrawal of offer, it really rescinds everything. It clears, it wipes everything of what we ultimately agreed, right? If done correctly. This is why immediately when you receive an offer, regardless of what the offer looks like on number two, you want to immediately send the buyer withdrawal of offer because that resets your seller's position to now entertain multiple offers, right? Because it stops that. Now we pivot. Now we can now negotiate more than one offer. Okay. And if not done correctly, you may put yourself in a position where you have to accept the buyer number one, right? So immediately when you get a second offer, you send a withdrawal of offer, resending, and that withdrawal of offer stipulates that now because we sent you a withdrawal of offer is because we have another offer in place. Now the position is you have two offers or three, and now we can send the multiple counteroffer. Okay, does that make sense so far? Okay. As you can see, the SMCO, seller multiple counteroffer, is used when countering multiple buyers simultaneously. Okay. It's not binding until the seller selects and accepts offer in paragraph number 8. And we'll explain it a little bit more. Just because you send out 5 counter or multiple counter offers and they all come back accepting the seller's respond doesn't necessarily means that the seller is on the hook. That's the beautiful and that's the powerful thing of the seller multiple counteroffer that the single SCO does not have, because the SEO doesn't have language in there that says that just because you accepted the terms of my client, the seller doesn't obligate me yet to accept your counter.
Unlike the SBO does.
100%. Absolutely. Yes.
And that's the major distinction between SCO and SMCO. If a buyer accepts the price and terms that is put on the SBO, the seller is obligated to accept the acceptance of the buyer of the SCO.
That's right.
The SMCO does not obligate the seller. The seller has the luxury of picking and choosing which one they want to end up selecting.
That's right. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, absolutely. So do, number one, use the seller multiple counteroffer when countering more than one buyer at a time. All right. So we distinguish that. How does the seller multiple counteroffer create a safe negotiating zone? Right. Well, multiple offers received, as I mentioned. The seller multiple counteroffers sent to each buyer. So let's say, as an illustration here, and this diagram here on number 2, it shows that it's 3, right? 3 offers that came in. Now the beautiful thing is you don't have to send, singulars. You now use as a safe haven negotiating tool is the multiple counteroffer that has, again, specific language that says how we're going to navigate this, right? Seller then, in order to accept, right, will have to sign paragraph 8. Now, what if all of the offers that were sent as part of this illustration, what if they all come back and accept the seller's counter, right? Then what happens? Well, the seller can then resubmit a second multiple counteroffers or go with any of the 3. Okay. And if they go with any of the 3, then that would now considered a binding agreement, right? That's the safe negotiating zone that you have with the seller multiple counteroffer that allows you to accept any of the 3s or counter any of the 3s, or say, I'm not going to counter all 3, but just 2 out of those 3 as well. Okay. Because the language on the very bottom of the seller multiple counteroffer says only if the seller accepts, that now becomes an executed acceptance, and therefore we're going with buyer number 2. Okay. So on the bottom it says until paragraph 8 is completed, no binding contract exists, even if the buyer accepts all seller terms. Right. That's what it is. And the beautiful thing too is, let's say that offers are coming in. I can send different terms to each different buyer. It doesn't have to be uniform, okay? Because let's say you list the property for $1 million, right? And you get 3 offers, and one is $1 million at asking, one is below at $995, and then the third one is above $1 million, right? So you can either do all multiple counter offers and submit all 3 with the intent of seeing how much room that you can push to get them to the level where the seller will consider or accept their offers, right? That's the beautiful and the dynamics of these contracts, that this is part of the exciting elements and components of negotiations, in my opinion, right? When you're the seller's agent receiving multiple offers, okay? Thoughts, questions, or concerns yet? Pretty self-explanatory? We're good? All right, let's continue. So the differences between the SEO versus the SMCO, it's critical, right? So the SEO risk, binding, moment buyer signs and delivers. As Steve was saying, once we accept or the buyer accepts the seller counteroffer, we're pretty much in a binding agreement. Therefore, the buyer's conclusion would be that, we got the offer accepted, we're going to open escrow immediately, right? If it's not within within a couple of days or the following week, right? That's exciting, right? When there is no other multiple counteroffers, then on the buyer's agent's perspective, it's like, okay, we're just negotiating terms with the seller, okay? And that can be a good thing or it can be a bad thing too as well, right? Because one, how long has the property been on the market? Is the property overpriced? There's many elements of it, right? When it comes to negotiating. When you're dealing with more of a multiple counteroffer, it's when the property is obviously a desirable property, right? Multiple buyers are interested in the property. Maybe it's location, maybe the way the property looks, maybe it's price. Maybe the amenities that the property has is why we're getting excitement in a lot of offers being submitted, right? Where the seller the seller multiple counter offer protects the seller, retains control until the bottom part. Even though there's a section there, folks, where the seller signs, right? Because when they send a seller multiple counter offer, they're going to sign, this is what I'm sending the buyer. But there's another section, which is paragraph number 8, that says that once that is signed by the seller, because there's 2 signatures that the seller will sign, you don't want to sign both simultaneously. You only sign one and send it out to the buyer. And then the buyer will either determine to accept or counter or reject. Okay. And then once they return it back, you as the listing agent and the seller have the option to send another multiple counter offer or accept or reject as well. That's the beautiful thing in the dynamics of the multiple counter offer. So where is the risk on a seller counteroffer, right? Well, basically the trap. If 2 buyers accept separately the seller counteroffer before a withdrawal, the seller faces a dispute, okay? Because I can say that if I'm buyer number 1 and Steve is buyer number 2, okay, and we get 2 singular counteroffers, and we both come back and rush it to the listing agent. In our opinion, is we accepted the seller's terms and conditions, so therefore, I believe that we got the offer accepted. And then Steve and his client are going to say the same thing. Well, hey, congratulations. He's going to let his buyer know we got our offer accepted because it was a singular counteroffer instead of a multiple counteroffer. You see where I'm going with this? So the argument there is, well, now the listing agent is in a sticky situation. Yeah, pretty much. Because now it's like, wait a minute. And it's happened where they made a mistake because they didn't realize they were going 100 miles. They might have had multiple properties and they're dealing, and they might have forgotten to send a withdrawal offer and they've forgotten to send a multiple counter offer. And now they thought, oh my gosh, we just sent out 2 seller counter offers to 2 buyers and they came back and accepted our terms. Which one is? Now you have to basically bite the bullet. And it's not a very easy conversation to have because, believe me, Steve being a seasoned experienced broker and Simon being a seasoned experienced broker, we're going to fight hard.
Exact scenario happened with one of my buyers, where I represented them as a buyer, 7, 8 years ago. Actually, when I had my own company at that point.
Yeah.
Okay. The exact same scenario. Okay. Listing agent sent out 2 independent counteroffers. Both the buyers accepted them. One of them being mine. Okay. And so after some discussion, without attorneys involved, okay, the buyer, my client said, well, we'll withdraw, okay, if the seller ends up paying us $25,000 to go away.
$25,000.
$1,000. They went away. Sellers spend, they go, because the threat of the lawsuit, okay, because what happened then is that seller via the listing agent's action, sent out 2 individual counter offers, okay, that were both accepted. They were both legally binding documents. There was only one house to be purchased to 2 separate sets of buyers.
Right.
Okay. And so they just analyzed the risk reward efforts, even if, to go fight it in court the whole bit with attorney fees and time and
Well, not just that, but thank you for sharing. I mean, that's extreme. 25,000 and they don't even have the property yet in escrow with them and they're damaged. And that was kind of their escape is like, yeah, we'll back out, but this is the recourses that we're asking for damages, right? On top of that, just to add to more of that cherry on top, is what if the buyer's so upset, hires and retains an attorney, and then puts a lien against the property, right? Yeah, they can put a lease pendants because there's a dispute. I'm disputing. I have a concrete seller counteroffer that the seller sent that says that if I accept these terms and I send it back with the buyer's signature, I have a binding agreement in place. So therefore, I need to open escrow.
But the more important thing then of that understand the seller. It was not the seller's fault. Okay. They hired their real estate professional to represent them appropriately. Their agent did not do that. I'm assuming that they had cause against their listing agent because they did not represent them appropriately. That cost them $25,000.
First thought was that that can have the issue, but then you represent throughout.
Well, exactly. Whether, so understand anything we do, we're going to be held liable if it was not in your client, the seller's best interest, especially if it costs.
Just to add to what Steve was saying, it's very easy, right? Very easy to point fingers and blame someone. Who are they going to blame? They're going to blame us. Well, I went in the direction of what you told me to do, right? And I trusted in your judgment and your position, and therefore we signed what you told us to sign, not knowing that there was this other form, right?
Option of withdrawal and resubmission of seller multiple counteroffer. It would have been as simple as that.
Exactly.
At the listing agent, and we were the second offer.
Yeah.
Okay, so that
let me just put it here closer to you guys or the people on Zoom. You had a question?
Is this a relatively new?
No. Oh no, it's been in existence for a bit. Yeah. So that's the beautiful.
Probably.
There's three forms: the buyer counter offer, the seller counter offer, and the seller multiple counter offers. Those are the 3 forms, depending on who you're working with, the buyer, the seller. So you got to be mindful.
It used to be a horse race.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it used to be back in our times. We're old school. We're old timers.
Yeah, right on the hood of the car. Okay, and you have your clients meet you at the property during negotiations.
Exactly. All right, well, let's go ahead and continue. So if 2 buyers accept separate SEOs before withdrawal, the seller faces the disputes over who accepted first. Expenses, time consuming, and ownership, or at least getting into escrow. The seller multiple counteroffer eliminates those risks entirely. That's where you need to know, right? All right. Don't use the seller multiple counteroffer unless the seller has actually received multiple offers. And this is a very fine line and very tricky, because I know agents, they're always trying to find maneuvers because they're expected, right? They're putting pressure. They're getting pressure from the seller, right? And they're trying to put the buzz when they're not receiving enough buyers, right? And more so if they use the strategy to lower the price with the intent that the seller wants this specific number, but they use, well, let's put it at this to build that auction environment to get multiple offers. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. So you got to be mindful and careful in how you maneuver those, right? Using the seller multiple counteroffer will only, with only one buyer, implies other offers exist, right? That could be misrepresentation. Okay. And if someone finds out, meaning the opposing agent, and they have evidence, you can be in a pickle. You can be in a serious ethical complaint. Okay. Do the right thing, folks. Do the right thing. Okay. And I understand, with the added pressure and trying to get this property in escrow, it's not worth damages, monetary, and potential reprimand from the Department of Real Estate or even the local association. I'm just saying, nothing is worth it. Yes.
If can we put a conditional acceptance of the SMCO, provided that they give us the other offers they received? Like, can we ask them to show us to prove that they've received multiple offers?
I mean, can you ask? You can definitely ask. But I've never experienced. Steve, have you ever?
I have not, and nor would I, as a listing agent, ever share that.
Yeah.
I understand from a buyer agent perspective of that. Now, you're wanting it only for the aspect of proving that there is more than one offer. Okay,
Yeah.
and I understand that's most likely the intent of asking that question. Okay, but I would take it on, you would take it on face value, and only if you felt there was unethical behavior at the end of the negotiation,
Right.
when you felt you need to investigate, only then would the listing agent have to end up producing those documents then at that point.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I mean, he definitely has a good point. Can I ask for proof, right? Yeah, you can ask. But I can tell you that a lot of agents will be hesitant and then they can use as a safe haven. Well, I've been instructed by the seller not to provide that, which we don't know, right? If that's the case, but that can be that safe haven protection not to allow you to receive legitimate counteroffers or offers in general, right? You can ask, and some will, some won't. So it doesn't hurt. But I can tell you from personal experience, it's very far and few that I see those situations happening. But good question. Good
Hi,
question.
Simon. I have a question.
Yes.
So in terms of, let's say you received 10 offers. Out of the 10 offers, only 4 of them are very close and competitive to what the seller is looking for. Do we still have to send the seller multiple counter offer to all 10, or just the 4 that, the closest one and those 4 only?
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I'm going to throw it back at you. What do you think? Do you think that you have to counter all 10, or can your client cherry pick and just pick maybe 3 out of those 10?
It's
I'm
not.
throwing it back at you.
Okay, so it's not matter. I think it's not matter of cherry picking. It's matter of, who's then closest to the, asking price, and with the best condition of the contract offer. Not just, somebody might say, hey, house worth $1 million, but we're gonna pay only $700,000, so that's way off. But if somebody says you are willing to go for, 1 million to 975,000, then I think that's fair to give them a counter offer. Or if they say even somebody else out of the 4 says I pay 1,050,000. So I don't think it's fair to the rest, just to waste the money and the time, uh, because they're not gonna meet our, condition anyway.
All right, let me rephrase it. You're right. I shouldn't have used the word cherry pick, right? And what I'm thinking out loud is, when the seller is looking at all of the offers, the seller has the ability to say, yeah, I'll want you to send counter offers to all 10. I only want you to send counter offers to the first 3 best terms, price, and condition. Or heck, you know what? This one offer, I'm okay. I love the price. I love the terms. I love the conditions. I want to go ahead and accept that. So to answer your question, yes, you don't necessarily have to submit multiple counter offers to all. It can be whatever the preference of your seller's wishes. I hope that kind of answers your question.
Yes, sir.
Okay. May I continue? All right. So using the seller multiple counteroffer with only one buyer implies other offers exist, and again, it could be considered a misrepresentation. So be very careful. So misrepresentation and the risk. One buyer, wrong form, right? By using the seller multiple offer, the seller implicates, represents that they are negotiating multiple offers simultaneously, right? Countering a single buyer with a seller multiple counteroffer could be viewed as material misrepresentation, exposing the seller and agent to legal liability, as clearly stated in a situation similar but not as direct as Steve's position, right? So be very careful. Look, if you don't have two offers, then use the singular. And if another offer comes while negotiations, then withdraw it, and then you have the right to now exercise the seller multiple counteroffer. So quick rule, which form to use? Are there multiple offers? Okay, if there is multiple offers, no, use the single counteroffer, standard seller counteroffer. And if yes, right, pretty self-explanatory, right? Use the multiple counteroffer as part of it. When in doubt, confirm the numbers of active offers before selecting your forms. Look, folks, very simple. Nothing rocket science about this, right? If you get one offer, then remember, okay, one offer, seller counteroffer. Multiple offers, multiple seller counteroffer. That's it, okay? Don't overcomplicate it. Don't put yourself in a liability, and make sure you understand the elements of how you navigate this. Because if you send out a singular counteroffer to two offers, and I've seen that situation, and I tell the agent immediately, send the withdrawal of offer. Thank goodness none of the two offers that were sent singulars were accepted yet. So we immediately sent the withdrawal of offer, and that saved the agent from a chaotic situation of two offers being accepted. So be very, very careful on that. Do tailor each seller counteroffer to each individual offer when necessary. When necessary, right? So paragraph 2 of the seller counteroffer, there's some flexibility on the clause. Sellers may send different terms to different buyers. Paragraph 2 explicit permits this. No requirements for identical counteroffer. So basically, the beautiful thing is that on a multiple counteroffer, I can send one specific buyer, buyer number 1, price, terms, and conditions. Buyer number 2 may be totally different than buyer 1. Buyer 2 is something different. Maybe it's just one thing, because the price is good, the terms are good, but maybe the conditions need to be tweaked a little bit, and that's it with counteroffer number 2. Then multiple counteroffer number 3 may just be just the price, right? That they're working on and tweaking, right? So all 3 of the different seller multiple counteroffers are different. They don't have to be exact, because when an offer comes in, they're not going to be exact, right? One may have a high price point, the other may have a close of escrow to be 15 days, and the seller actually needs 30 days, and maybe the seller needs a seller in possession for another 7 days, right? So you got to look at it. So when I get offers, this is just what I do because I'm old school when it comes to this, okay? Not that it's the best approach, but I'll literally still print the offers, and then I highlight with a yellow highlighter, and I just highlight everything. And I double check, triple check to make sure I am not missing anything, because when I'm preparing the seller counteroffer, I want to make sure I'm concise and I don't cross and give information to some buyer that was supposed to go to this other buyer, right? So make sure your alignment and making sure that everything makes sense to you. And then, again, for me, the purchase agreement is the most vital form. Is I'm checking and I'm seeing, okay, this one is asking for 3% compensation where this buyer agent is only asking for 2.5 compensation, right? So do I need a counter? Yeah, maybe the seller says I'm only giving up to 2.5%, and you fail to put that into your seller multiple counter offer, and now it's binding. The assumption from the buyer's agent is they're getting a 3% compensation. So be very careful on that. Questions on that? Okay. Watch out. Countering all buyers with the same contingency deadlines may advertently extend the buyer's original shorter deadlines unless it is the seller's intent, right? So keep all of this mindful, right? Because there's timelines, and I understand when there's a lot of moving parts. You may get an offer today, you may get an offer tomorrow, you may get an offer on Sunday. Heck, you may get another offer on Monday, right? The essence is the beautiful thing about the listing agreement, there's specific language that says to you as instructions, is the seller wanting to get the offers as they come or a specific date? So if the seller says, look, I don't want offers as they come, let's give a deadline for all offers to be submitted by this time in this date, and then we'll review all of them, right? And that's perfectly fine. Maybe the seller says, I don't want to be bombarded. Let's just get all of them. And then once we receive them, we close it out, meaning the MLS, you can place it on hold while the seller is negotiating terms, price, and conditions, and then preparing the multiple counter offers, or even just a single counter offer as well. Okay. Thoughts, questions? We're good. All right, so let's tailor it in a practical element and real examples, right? So you got buyer A, B, and C. Okay, and let's say that the original contingency deadlines, right? Maybe this is what the buyer submitted, right? Buyer number one, which is the one on top, right? It's original contingencies, which is typically what? 17 days, most of the contingencies, right? And buyer A is putting a 14-day condition, right? As an example, buyer B is putting a 21-day, and buyer C is putting a 17-day, right? So seller then intent counter, right? So buyer A is 14 days on a contingency deadline, where 14 days, no changes needed, right? Because the seller is content with, I'm good with 14 instead of 17. The buyer's already, dropped it down. So what this telling the seller is within 14 days or 2 weeks, they're going to release a specific contingency, right? It can be physical inspections, it can be seller's disclosure, whatever the case may be, but they're already putting that into play, right? Buyer B submits their offer, but they're asking for, instead of 17 days as original on the contract, they're pushing it from 17 days to 21 days, right? On the counter offer, they can do so by saying, I like what buyer A put. 14 days seems to be the sweet spot. Let's go ahead and counter that. Instead of 21 days, we're allowing buyer B to also release that as part of the condition in 14 days, right? And then the same with buyer number C, right? 17 days is the contingency, which is the default amount. But again, the seller can also include as part of the counter that 14 days is part of the seller's position, which is intentionally what the seller really wants. Or they can change it. It could be 10 days. If you want to be very aggressive, we want to see how much the buyer is willing to get into escrow. We can be very stern and strong with those conditions, right, Steve? I mean, at the end, if it's an investor, if it's a property that needs renovations, you can really tighten those conditions, right? To make sure that, hey, if you can meet these expectations, then it'll be faster that the buyer releases all contingencies and then ultimately get the deal closed, right? Now, most of all contingencies default at 17 days. There's a couple of things that, it's 5 days or 2 days and all that. But most of the contingencies, the hard contingencies, are defaulted to 17 days. The cool thing about a seller multiple counteroffer, if that's part of your seller's wishes, we can be very aggressive, or we can be very passive, or we can just leave it alone and have it as the default amount. So it's really a discretion on the seller's position. Now, they're going to ask you, well, Simon, what's your thoughts and opinions, right? Because you're the guided advisor, right? Well, based on what I'm seeing on here, this one seems to be a good offer. Let's kind of push the envelope on this and see where we land. Even though we send the seller multiple counteroffer, doesn't necessarily mean that the buyer has to accept, right? Doesn't have to accept our terms. Then now what they can do is check on the seller multiple counteroffer. Buyer acknowledges and receives it, but with the understanding and stipulation that they're going to send another counteroffer, that they don't really approve the seller counteroffer. We're going now with a buyer counteroffer back to the seller. Does that make sense? I hope I'm not confusing people. Yes, Steve.
And I can clarify, dealing with counteroffers.
Yeah.
Especially in multiple, when there's ping ponging going back and forth, seller counteroffer, buyer counteroffer.
Mhm.
Understand that every time a counteroffer is written, it states in there that buyer or seller, depending on which one you're writing up, accepts the price and terms stated in the prior counteroffer, other than what is now being changed in the new counteroffer. So you don't have to reiterate everything that was written in counteroffer A by the seller, okay, onto counteroffer B, okay, by the buyer, okay.
Right.
It's automatically implied, so you're only following the changes that are taking place. Everything else that was stated and is agreed upon the parties still remains intact. It's only the changes is what's now being negotiated. Changes and or additions, that was not referenced in any prior documents.
Yeah, love that. Thank you. And the bottom says, sending a blanket seller multiple counteroffer without reviewing each offer exists terms can create unintentional extensions. And what that means is be mindful, right? They may put something in there that you missed, right? Maybe it was concessions, that seller will give, $10,000 of closing costs to the buyer, and that can be hidden somewhere when you're rapid fire, when you have multiple offers and you miss it. And now you're kind of in a binding situation. So make sure that when you're looking at the offers that you really check everything, right? Because there may be something in there. And I see these disputes all the time. I've seen disputes over home warranty, okay, which is the most ridiculous thing, right? Well, it says up to 1,500 home warranty, but they didn't put any additional upgrades, right? So in the mind of the listing agent, they're saying, okay, that's a standard coverage. They didn't write for the pool, for the AC, for the roof. So in the minds is, it says up to $1,500, but I'm going to get the standard plan, and that could be $800. And the dispute from the buyer's agents, wait a minute, you're supposed to give us up to $1,500. Well, no, the contract didn't say you wanted optional upgrades, right? So be very careful. Some of the things that can be very tiny, very small can blow up, and ultimately now agents are paying the difference, right? Well, to make the deal stick, because when emotions happen, agents gonna have to write some checks too as well to make this deal stick and we move forward. So, okay. All right, let's continue. Don't default to ask for the highest and best without countering specific terms. This is a big one, folks. I know we've been programmed and we've been lectured, and we still, to this day, we see buyer to give highest and best. Okay. I want to put some emphasis on this because that language is very vague. Request puts buyers in a awkward position and invites confusion, right? There's no clarity, right? Now, tell me, if you're a buyer, would you like to pay more than what the home is really worth? Or would you have been upset if you realized that your offer, because when the listing agent put highest and best as an example, and you went 50,000, which you didn't have to, and now you're in contract and you find out that no one went as high as you did because you thought you really wanted this place and you thought you needed to compete with other offers, and now you're pissed, right? That may ultimately be a frustration on the buyer, and they may want to cancel because of that. It's the little things, right? So I'm going to help you navigate these conversations more so as a listing agent and how you're navigating this negotiation and the proper language to add to it. Okay, because to me, when I hear highest and best, it's somewhat kind of vague in my opinion, and I'll share what I mean by that. So the problem with highest and best, okay, what sellers are thinking happens, right? You listed the property for 500,000 as an example, right? Buyers compete against each other, driving the price and improve terms, right? Meaning, obviously, the seller wants the most. They want to squeeze the much limit out of this property as they possibly can, right? But there is no real sense of where we stand, right, when it comes to multiple offers. Now, can a buyer agent ask how many offers the listing agent and the seller have?
We
The answer
can.
is yeah. You can ask. Say again?
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Yeah, you can definitely. It says on the contract that if asked how many offers, that they should divulge that information. Can a buyer also ask what is the highest price you have? The answer is yes, you can. Okay. If asked directly by a buyer's agent, the language on the listing agreement does say, and you can reference that and put a position to the listing agent says, hey, per the listing agreement, if asked what is the offers, the highest offers, and how many offers, you have to divulge that. Now, the only avenue where the listing agent doesn't have to divulge that information is only if the seller has given you a written request not to provide that information. And if you have that in writing from the seller, then unfortunately the seller's instructed me not to provide that information. But a lot of agents don't know that. And a lot of agents believe that by shielding and not divulging that is a good thing. To me, it's not a good thing because my job is a fiduciary responsibility at the utmost care to my clients. I want to give them the most that I can, right? This is why they hired me as a negotiator and a marketer to help them push it to the finish line. So why would I not divulge that information? I want to be clear because I want to know, is this new buyer willing to step up to the plate or it's just a waste of time? So and this is just me talking, I would divulge that. Yeah, I have 5 offers. The highest offer that I have is at $1.1 million. Do you want to play? Okay, I'm being clear, transparent, and I'm being truth to the seller because I want the seller to get the most. And if the buyer wants to, that's a win for me because now you have dialogue with the buyer that may be willing to go even more than 1.1 million. Just saying. I don't like the agents that don't divulge this information. I don't understand why. Oh, I can't provide you that information. Why? Because why?
I know why.
Yeah, I do too.
They're working with the wrong buyer that they're trying to put in there as well. And
Yeah.
If the price starts getting higher, that potential buyer is no longer their potential buyer.
100%. Yeah, that might be one of the reasons. Yes.
Received my license in 2013, so I don't know if this has a you were the next time I'm worried that you're not allowed to
Disclose what?
what the offers are.
If you look at the listing agreement, and if you want, after our session, I can show you on the listing agreement, it says there that if asked, how many offers, what's the highest offer, you must divulge that information. It's on there.
It's just been a common practice, unfortunately, over the years. It really had been.
You feel it's like, it's tissue.
Okay.
Sorry.
But yeah, you were saying, Steve, yeah, it's been like a common practice.
But I've always reviewed, when I'm a listing agent, because yeah, our job is to get the highest price possible for ourselves. That's our job.
That's right. Yeah. So better than the highest and best counter with actual terms. Okay, so this is an actual counter offer that, based on what I feel, and again, a lot of this information is straight from the California Association of Realtors. I do my research, and I'll talk with Carligo, and I'll get a basis of the do's and don'ts, because I don't want to lecture and provide wrong information, right? Because then you're going to say, well, Simon told me, right? So, but I also want to be clear with it. Never use the word highest and best, okay? Instead, use actual numbers, okay? If the seller wants a specific price, then put it, okay? Put it, price shall be 1.250. Okay? Does that mean that the buyer has to pay 1.250? No. It only says this is where the seller wants to be at. Now, if you want to play, then you go. Okay. Does that mean that that's the top number? No, because if I have multiple offers, that might be a position. Okay, that's now the base, even though it might have been 1.2 million listing. Offers came in at 1.2 million, but the seller really wants 1.250. Okay. And if the seller gets that offer, they may go ahead and accept. But if you got two or three offers and they're willing to go up to 1.275, even better for the seller. This language is a lot better than highest and best. Would you agree, Steve? Give me your thoughts. Give me your thoughts.
Here, it's not a simple answer, and I'm going to tell you the reason why. Okay. Because part of our jobs as listing agents as well, when offers come in, and especially if it's multiple offers, when you're analyzing them from the aspect of percentage of successful closing, okay, based on the down payment amount, okay, and loan approval ability and time frame, okay. And if we have multiple offers already now over the asking price, okay, with high down payment, so taking the ability of loan concern off the table now, okay, if I got a buyer who's now willing to go to the moon, okay, but anytime though there's a bidding war that I already feel is going to be exceeding where that property will appraise at, okay, based on comparables within that negotiation, because it's like we've now exceeded confidence of where they, we've now exceeded comparable value. Okay, it's not most likely going to even appraise at this price that all these offers are coming in at, that they're clustered around. Immediately then I'm going to be recommending taking the appraisal contingency off, meaning guys, just so you know, you're paying that premium now. You're now in premium land. Okay. And understand you're paying a premium and you're going to pay for it. Okay. Knowing you're going to pay the premium. You're the one, who put the price down, on it. And so, and if you're willing to pay more, that's why on the flip side of the coin, when I represent buyers, I always recommend for the buyers, knowing that if they're going into multiple offers, you give your highest and best price right out of the starting gate, because you may not get a second chance to give your highest and best. So you give your highest and best. So if in the event you get a counter offer that comes back highest and best, you come back with your same price. If that is your highest and best price. Okay. I've done that many a times, at that point. If the list price was $950 and the buyers were willing to go $1 million, and they go, $1 million is our top price, then you put it down if you're comfortable putting that down. And if you get it, and if the counter offer comes back, come back to the highest and best price, the $1 million stays on the response because.
So let me ask you this, Steve. Okay, I think I get where you're going, but let's just say you're the listing agent. You're telling me you prefer to put highest and best on the counter offer.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah. It will also depend on how many. Everything is in context. Okay. And I would not say it's a blanket for each and every offer, any day of the week, any month, because it depends on what is happening in the marketplace. Okay. And it depends on how many offers. Was this also a situation where, where the property is sitting on the market for 30 days, okay, with very little showing activity. And then all of a sudden which does occur, believe it or not, after a month, all of a sudden within a day and a half, you get 2 offers on the same property. Okay, and it's sat for the first 30 days without any activity.
I get all that. I just want to kind of bring it back to the counter offer here. And the reason is, and I get it. Look, at the end of the day, I'm just giving you guidance on my approach, right? Steve's approach is a little different and it works, right? I'm just telling you from a point of view of how I see things. I'd rather be concise and clear on what those expectations are, okay? Not that highest and best is wrong, because I see it, and that will continue on listing agents putting that, and that's fine. But here's my concern and my position is that if I am the buyer and I get that language saying highest and best, the buyer's going to rely on me to ask, well, Simon, what do you think we should ask for, right? Instead of being clear on what that number is. And now it puts me in a position where, what do I say? I don't know. What if I give them something and they end up paying more than what it should? And I get what you're saying, Steve, about the appraisal contingency as well, right? You want to protect that appraisal because if it doesn't appraise, right? If it doesn't appraise, then that's our exit or a second negotiations, right? But the truth of the matter here is, however you want to spin it is fine. I'd rather go in the approach of being very clear, in my opinion, a little bit of good faith here that I'm not sugarcoating is. Look, we know where the seller stands, and that can also mean is if I, as a listing agent, have to explain to them, my biggest concern, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, is property not appraising, right? If we push the limit by giving a very specific amount, right? Because I already did my comps and I comped it out that we should be in the 1 million, right? Or the 1.1. And now if we're pushing it to 1.250, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I don't know if it's gonna appraise, right?
Here's my concern there.
And I like this debate, guys. Like I said, we're here, this is good. This is good information.
If the reason why I don't like giving a number, typically at that point, if you're having multiple offers, most likely now we're already at or over asking price. Most likely. Okay. We're going to have to give that assumption for this discussion. Okay.
Yeah.
And so at that point, you are now, if we end up having, and if we're already at that point where our list price was predominantly where you felt the number be, from an appraisal standpoint, where it should appraise, if in the event you give a number, okay, which is now in excess of what we call market value of the appraised value, And if every one of them, of the buyers then say, no, I'm not willing to, you also run, in my opinion, run the risk of every one of those buyers just with backing off and not even responding to the counter.
Well, and that
As
goes.
opposed to coming back with, here's our final and best price, even if it was the original asking price that they end up putting.
And I get it, but here's my theory on this, right? Again, a good agent will know how to handle that type of objection. Because let's say that they can and are not willing to go 1.250. Does that mean it's game over for the buyer? No, it doesn't mean it's game over. It just means that we didn't hit the threshold where the seller wants. But what if we do an offer of 1.225, right? And that's the highest offer because all the other three offers didn't come anywhere near the 1.250. And now the seller says, look, the only one that came up was the 1.225. We're just going to go ahead and go with this offer. That may be the other conclusion to it.
The other approach, because you probably will already have something in between, again, from the seller trying to get the seller as much money as possible, we also may end up getting that buyer who really hits it out of the park, and steps up and goes 1.3. Okay, that's a true bonanza. Okay, which now then, this is kind of what I think. If that then occurs, and now we have the second round of negotiation after the buyer investigations, we got a little bit more money to play with. Okay, in the sense of keeping the deal together.
All right, but let's do this. What if you do put highest and best, and the buyer ultimately goes and makes an offer of 1.3?
Okay.
So the conclusion there is, do you think that the buyer may have overpaid for a property?
And again, I will then analyze it. I will analyze it based on, I wouldn't do that with a 5% or 10% down buyer because just from a loan standpoint, they probably could not end up closing this thing. But again, as well as they better have done it from already removal of the appraisal contingency. That goes hand in hand. I already know negotiating above current comp market value. Okay. And so I'm already also letting my seller know that as well. You're getting a premium. You are receiving a premium on your property, Mr. and Mrs. Seller.
But what if the seller isn't getting a premium? What's premium? So I guess my question is, what if I put this property 100, 200,000 below market value?
Okay.
And then I put highest and best, right? And then the highest and best doesn't give me the amount that I'm looking for. Then we're kind of in the same boat. We're back to square one, in my opinion. And that's happened too as well. So I think being concise of what the seller's wishes is, if the seller wants 1.250, then I think we just need to be very transparent in our approach and say this.
Don't know that at that time.
But that's our job, to educate our agents or our clients, in my opinion. So I love debating with Steve. Of anyone, Steve is the person that I can definitely have, concise, conversation. I have respect for Steve. So thank you for being my debate partner. So, like I said, it doesn't really matter. I'm just giving you my perspective. And again, this is a lot of information straight out from the California Association of Realtors. All right, let's continue. For the sake of time, we got just a couple more slides before we close it out. So the seller multiple counteroffers do's and don'ts at a glance. Do use the seller multiple counteroffer when countering multiple offers, as we've illustrated. Don't use the seller multiple counteroffer if only one offer exists, right? I think we kind of clear that. Do tailor each counter to the specific offer received. Don't rely on vague highest and best requests instead of specific counters. And the bottom line for sellers and their agents, the seller multiple counteroffer protects the seller from accidental binding contracts in a competing situation. Form select must match the actual offer landscape. Accuracy in matters legally, and specific tailored counters outperform vague ask lead to strong, cleaner contracts. understanding the nuisance of the seller multiple counteroffers is not just best practice, it's essential for risk management. Okay. Using the right tools for the right situation, right? So refer to the car form, seller multiple counteroffer. And let me just show you the multiple counteroffer. Hopefully, let me go back to share. Make sure I got my glasses on so I know what I'm seeing. All right. Let's see. Okay. So this is the people on Zoom. Can you see the seller multiple counteroffer?
Yeah.
So Steve, hey, I love the negotiation between you and Steve. So there you go. Okay, great. All right, so this is the actual form that we're talking about, the seller multiple counteroffer. And it really just illustrates no difference than the seller counteroffer. You know, here are the terms. But here's the interesting part here, right? As the seller, when you submit a counteroffer, whatever that looks like here, right? All of the seller's terms, then the seller will sign here, okay? And then send it out to the buyer. That is only when you have multiple buyers, right? The beautiful thing, even though the buyer receives it and accepts it here, right? It's still not binding. Okay, it's not binding. It means that the buyer doesn't necessarily think. Well, they may think they have the offer accepted, but it's not. It's until this section here, number 8. Okay, when that seller signs number 8, then it becomes an acceptance. But even with that, the buyer will have to accept and agree to the terms of the seller counteroffer, right? And that's kind of how it works. So this is the sweet spot here, that if this is signed, so don't make the mistake to sign here, or your seller sign here and then sign here, because if they sign both section and the buyer accepts, then it's a binding agreement. So be very careful. All right, read it. Because it clearly says, look, by signing below, seller accepts the seller multiple counter offer. If applicable, agrees to extend the expiration, to the date. Do not, and it says right here, do not, note to the seller, do not sign in this box until after buyer signs in paragraph 7, right here, right? Do not sign this in this box if this seller multiple counter offer is subject to an attached counter offer. Okay, so again, it's pretty self-explanatory. The seller will sign on this section here, right? It's not binding. It's just telling the buyer, hey, these are the terms that the seller wants. And then now the buyer has the option, right, to accept or click here, subject to attached counteroffer. That means they accept some or all, or they don't accept anything, but we're going to send you another counteroffer. Okay? So that's kind of the spiel for today's class. Thoughts, questions, or concerns?
Can I interject real quick?
Yes, sir.
As a listing agent, one of the most trickiest things to deal with is when you're dealing with countering 2 offers, where one offer that comes in is a respectable offer, and the second offer is not a respectable offer. Okay, referring to because then at that point the seller's in a very good position, and yet at a very scary position for the sake of negotiation, thinking, hey, I got a multiple offer. Okay, good for me. We don't want to let the other party know that the second offer is not really a competitive offer. They don't know that. All they know is that we're now able to issue a multiple counteroffer. That part is good. So recommendation, you should utilize the fact that you got a crappy second offer in as a leverage position to be able to issue a multiple counter offer. Really knowing that you're really doing it for the sake of trying to clean up or maximize the one offer then generate. And probably almost like in that scenario, if the price, that's probably where I would recommend and advise the seller to now counter a specific price. Okay, especially if that price was not already at the price, at even the list price, but it was better than the second offer. Okay.
Yeah.
Because, multiple offer, I think we've gotten very spoiled these last few years. Anytime you think we have multiple offers, thinking up guaranteed sale, guaranteed acceptance. Okay. Because if you get too overly aggressive or assertive, okay, in that pricing strategy and or everything else, that more appealing buyer could also then walk away. And then you're stuck with the unappealing one, which is still far below what your seller wants, and you're stuck with that.
Yeah.
So that to me is almost where you really have to, as a listing agent, really earn your salt of you really got to pay attention to not negotiate, two buyers out of a deal, but especially the one good one that you're dealing with.
Yeah. And for the most part, and thank you, Steve, for sharing. I mean, for the most part, if it's a great property, it's most likely going to go into escrow. I'm just, again, giving you kind of the perspective and how I see these multiple counteroffers. Don't abuse it. Use it to your advantage. It's a negotiating tool for you, and make sure you're using the proper form. With that being said, Steve, thank you, sir. Appreciate the discussion. And for everyone on Zoom, thank you very much. The lecture is recorded, so if you want to check it out back, just go to our YouTube channel. And if you want a copy of the presentation, please send me an email. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your weekend, and I'll see you in the next contract class. Thank you.
Thank you so
Simon.
much.
Thank
This
you.
was